Everyone
It's all
ignored
right,
the
boy.
injured horse
Just take it
dragging
easy.
her broken body across the field, until one
Help is
stranger she
coming.
chose refused to walk away. She had dragged herself through the cold Wyoming fields for hours, her legs barely holding on, while people drove
We almost
past
got him.
without
Keep
slowing.
moving up.
No one knew her
Watch
name.
his footing on the
No
ramp.
one cared,
Quickly, gently
until
now.
the moment she locked eyes with a quiet man repairing an old fence. And with
It's
the
all right,
last
easy
of her
now.
strength, she chose him,
She's gonna
and
make you feel
everything
better.
changed. The late autumn sun over Sheridan, Wyoming was sinking low, stretching a thin wash of gold across the endless grasslands. It was the kind of light that made the whole world look softer, quieter, almost holy, before the cold slipped in and claimed the evening. But on that particular day, nothing about the scene felt peaceful. The wind carried a strange heaviness, as if it had witnessed something it wished it could unsee. Far beyond the fence lines and the sparsely scattered cottonwoods, a small horse moved through the fields in a way no horse ever should. Not trotting, not even walking, dragging. Her hind legs trembled with each pull, scraping along the ground and leaving faint, broken lines behind her. Her coat, normally the bright, earthy brown of a young mare, was dulled with dust and dried sweat. The muscles along her side quivered with effort, and every so often her body faltered, sinking halfway before she forced herself upright again. Willow didn't know where she was going. She only knew she had to keep moving. The world around her blurred in and out, as if the wind was erasing pieces of reality faster than she could understand them. Pain pulsed through her flank in warm, rhythmic waves, and her breath came out in short, uneven bursts. But she pressed forward anyway, drawn by nothing more than a faint, instinctive hope, something fragile and old, like the memory of a voice she once trusted. On the county road bordering the field, a silver SUV slowed when the driver spotted her. For a moment, one tiny, suspended moment, it seemed like the world might shift. Willow raised her head, ears trembling as if bracing for rescue. But the driver only hesitated, eyes wide with startled confusion, before speeding up again. The tires spat gravel into the fading light, and the SUV disappeared down the road. A second car came minutes later, then a third. People stared, whispered inside their vehicles, pointed, but no one stopped. No one even opened a window. Horses in Wyoming were common, almost ordinary, but a horse moving like this, lost, staggering, desperate, felt like a responsibility no one wanted to inherit. And so the field remained silent. Willow lifted her head one more time, searching the horizon for shapes she remembered, for the sound of soft footsteps or a familiar whistle. None came. Only the wind answered, colder now, slipping between the tall grasses like an old sorrow. Behind her, the trail she left looked like a plea carved into the land. The mare's breathing grew harsher. She paused, trembling, her front legs bracing as if the earth beneath her were swaying. For a moment she seemed ready to give in, let the wind take her, let the cold finish what the long afternoon had started. But then something flickered inside her, a tiny, stubborn spark. She pushed again, dragging herself forward, step by step, toward nothing and everything at once. The sun dipped lower, the sky shifted from gold to a washed-out pink, the kind that made the world look both beautiful and unbearably fragile. And in that light, Willow's shadow stretched long behind her, thin, shivering, almost disappearing into the grass. She swayed and nearly fell, catching herself at the last second. A soft, broken sound escaped her muzzle. It wasn't quite a cry, not quite a breath, just a small exhale of a creature who had run out of ways to ask for help. Yet she moved again. The wind changed direction then, blowing toward the old fence line on the eastern edge of the field. Beyond that fence, someone was working, a faint rhythmic sound of metal tapping wood, like a quiet heartbeat keeping time. Willow didn't know who it was. She couldn't see him, but her ears twitched, drawn to the steady noise, and her body shifted slightly toward it. Caleb Hartman paused his hammering, glancing across the field without understanding why. He only saw the grass bowing to the wind. To him, that was enough reason to return to his work, sinking another nail into the sun-bleached post. Far from him, Willow blinked slowly, gathering whatever strength she had left. The cold bit at her skin, urging her to stop. But something deep within her refused, the same instinct that had carried her through the long, lonely afternoon. She turned toward the faint sound of the man she did not know, and began to drag herself in his direction. The wind watched quietly, as if holding its breath. Caleb Hartman didn't hear the mare at first. All he heard was the soft clink of nails in his jacket pocket, the weight of the hammer in his hand, and the wind brushing past the broken fence. Working alone at dusk had become a kind of shelter for him, quiet, predictable, free from questions that strangers always seemed to ask. He preferred the company of the fence posts, the dry soil, the slow breathing of the land. They never asked him who he used to be. They never asked him why he left firefighting, and they never looked at him with the kind of pity that made his chest tighten. He swung the hammer again, driving the final nail into a weathered board. The sound echoed once across the field before fading into the dusk. Caleb wiped his forearm across his brow, leaving a streak of dust near his temple, then rested both hands on the top rail. He breathed in the cold air, letting it steady him. Nights came early this time of year, and the temperature was already slipping. He should go home soon, he told himself, heat up the leftover stew, feed the dog, avoid the news, the emails, the world. But something tugged at his attention. Not a sound exactly, more like a shift in the way the field breathed, as if the land itself was holding tension. He squinted, scanning the ridge of grasses that rippled like an ocean under the rising wind. Nothing at first, then movement, small, hesitant. He narrowed his eyes, leaning forward. Someone might have let a calf slip through the fence, or maybe a stray mule deer injured by early frost. Caleb wasn't the kind of man to panic, but the thought kept pressing into him, soft but persistent. Something out there wasn't moving right. He stepped away from the fence, boots pressing deep into the dry soil as he walked a few feet closer to the field. The air grew colder as the sun dipped lower, smothering the last hint of warmth. Along the horizon, the light thinned until it resembled a fading memory. Then he saw it. A small horse, dark against the pale grass, struggling with a motion that wasn't a walk at all. She lifted her front legs with visible effort, bracing her weight before dragging the rest of her body forward through the brittle stems. It was a movement that made Caleb's chest tighten, not out of fear, but something quieter, something older. He stood still, unsure what he was witnessing. Horses didn't move like that unless something was terribly wrong. The mare's head dipped low, her breath clouding faintly in the cooling air. Even from a distance, he could sense the exhaustion weighing on her body. Caleb took one involuntary step back. He didn't want this, didn't want responsibility, didn't want another life pressing itself into his quiet, carefully rebuilt world. He had spent years learning how to live without stepping forward, without answering calls for help that weren't his job anymore. He had learned how to keep his own heart steady by keeping it closed. But the horse looked up, just once, and in that single glance, distant, fragile, dust-covered, Caleb felt something in him hesitate, like a door he thought he had locked shifting on its hinges. "No," he whispered to himself, "don't do this." He stayed where he was. The mare kept dragging herself forward. Caleb gripped the fence with both hands, fighting the instinct he had trained out of himself. The instinct that always pushed him toward trouble, toward danger, toward anyone who needed even an ounce of help. He had followed that instinct his whole life. It had cost him sleep. It had cost him peace. And one terrible night it had cost him much more. He swallowed hard and tried to look away, but the wind carried a soft, shaky exhale across the field, the kind of sound an animal makes when it's out of options. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it cut through him like a thin blade of cold. Caleb stepped forward. Just one step, then another. The mare lifted her head higher. Her ears twitched, first with uncertainty, then with a faint flicker of recognition, as if she had been searching for something, someone, and had finally found a shape that felt safe. Caleb stopped halfway across the distance. Too close, he thought. Too involved. Too late to pretend he didn't see her. The mare shuddered, her front legs trembling. She tried to lift herself a little straighter, but faltered, sinking briefly before catching herself again. When she pushed forward this time, her body swayed, but her eyes, dark, glassy, hopeful, stayed fixed on him. "Easy," Caleb murmured, though he wasn't sure if he meant it for her or himself. He took another few steps until he was near enough to see the details. The dust clinging to her coat, the way her muscles shook, the faint streaks of dry blood near her flank. She wasn't wild, not fully. There was a softness in her face that spoke of human hands once brushing her coat, of a halter that had been removed recently, of trust that once lived inside her and hadn't fully died. "Where did you come from?" he whispered. The mare blinked slowly. Her breath fogged the cool air. Then she moved again, just a foot or two, but she moved with purpose, dragging her weight toward him. Each inch looked like a negotiation with her own pain. Yet she didn't stop until she reached the edge of the fence line. Caleb knelt without thinking. It was instinct. It was reflex. It was surrender. The mare leaned her head forward, not in fear, not in confusion, in trust, a trembling, exhausted gesture that felt like a plea. And as her muzzle brushed softly against the toe of his boot, Caleb felt the quiet world around him shift, 1 degree at a time, towards something he wasn't ready for, but could no longer turn away from. For a long moment, Caleb didn't move. The mare's muzzle rested lightly against the toe of his boot, her breath warm but trembling, as if each exhale carried the last threads of her strength. The wind around them settled into an uneasy quiet, brushing through the grass with the gentleness of a hand that didn't want to disturb something sacred. Caleb exhaled slowly, his breath clouds drifting into the growing dusk. He wasn't sure how this had happened, how he'd ended up kneeling in the dirt with a broken creature leaning on him like he was the only safe place left in the world. The mare's head wavered, her legs shaking beneath her. She tried, just barely, to shift her weight closer, and the motion tugged painfully along her flank. Caleb instinctively extended a hand, stopping short of touching her. He didn't want to frighten her, but she didn't flinch. Instead, her gaze lifted to meet his. There was no wild fear in her eyes, only exhaustion, only hope, only the faintest hint of a plea. "You've been looking for someone," Caleb murmured, barely louder than the wind. The mare's ears twitched, her breath stuttering. She blinked once, slowly, as if acknowledging what he said, without needing to understand the words. Behind them, tires skidded lightly on gravel. Caleb turned his head, just enough to see a white SUV pulling up along the road. 2 people stepped out, a man and a woman, dressed like road trippers from somewhere far from Wyoming, clutching their jackets tighter as the temperature dropped. They stood at a distance, hesitating, whispering back and forth. The woman's face pinched with alarm. "Sir," she called out, "you shouldn't be near that horse. It might kick." Caleb didn't answer. He glanced back at the mare, who stayed completely still, nose still brushing his boot as though anchoring herself to him. There was no wildness in her body, no threat, just the quiet surrender of an animal who had gone farther than she should have, hoping someone, anyone, might care enough to stop. The man approached a few steps, hands raised defensively. "Look, buddy, we don't want trouble. That horse looks injured, really injured. You should call someone." Caleb rose slowly to his feet, careful not to disturb the mare's balance. "I will," he said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. He cleared his throat. "I will. But she came to me. She's asking for help." The man frowned. "Horses don't ask. They just react." Caleb looked down at her again. Willow, though he didn't know her name yet, lifted her head weakly, following him with her eyes. She tried to take another step toward him, her hooves dragging unevenly over the dirt. When her legs buckled, Caleb instinctively reached out, steadying her shoulder with his hand. She leaned into the touch like she had been waiting for it. "They react," Caleb said softly, "to the only thing they trust." The woman shifted nervously. "This is dangerous. You don't know where she came from." Neither did Caleb. But the mare's trembling quieted under his touch, as if she'd found a harbor after drifting in cold waters too long. He could feel the heat beneath her coat, feverish, wrong, and the faint trembling of muscles worn beyond their limit. He knew an injured animal when he saw one, and he knew she had been like this for hours, maybe longer. The woman reached into her pocket, pulling out her phone. "I'm calling animal control. This is too risky." Caleb opened his mouth to protest, but the mare shifted again, turning her head slightly to press it more firmly against his leg. It was barely a gesture, weak and clumsy, but it was deliberate. She was choosing him. A stranger, choosing him as if he were the last person who hadn't turned away. Something in Caleb's chest tightened. Not a painful squeeze, but something quieter, something like recognition. He had seen this look before, years ago, in a different set of eyes. The memory flickered, and he shut it out quickly, sealing it off before it could bloom into something sharp. The woman began speaking urgently into her phone, pacing in small circles. The man hovered awkwardly, as if unsure whether to stay or leave. The mare ignored both of them. She only watched Caleb, waiting for something he hadn't yet promised. He crouched again, bringing himself to her eye level. The cold earth pressed against his knees as he gently brushed his fingers along her cheek. Her skin quivered, but she didn't pull away. "You picked the wrong person," Caleb whispered. "I'm not the man I used to be." But the mare blinked slowly, as if answering in her own quiet way. "Maybe you still are." He exhaled, long and uneven, as if letting out years of breath he'd kept sealed inside. "All right," he murmured, "I'll help you. I don't know how yet, but I won't walk away." The mare's body sagged in relief. The faint tremor along her neck eased. Something in her shifted, not healed, not safe, but steadier. The woman pocketed her phone. "Animal control will be here in a few minutes." The mare stiffened at the sound of voices, just a subtle tightening of muscle, but enough for Caleb to feel it beneath his hand. She didn't want the strangers. She didn't want the officials who would examine her like a problem. She wanted him. Caleb rose to stand between her and the couple, not aggressively, just instinctively. A quiet shield. "She's scared," he said. "Let's just give her space." The man crossed his arms. "It's not your responsibility. Let the professionals handle it." Caleb looked down again at the mare, gently pressing her weight against his leg to keep herself from collapsing. Her trust wasn't loud or dramatic. It was soft, trembling, and completely undeserved, but it was real. "She came to me," he said simply. "That makes her my responsibility." The couple exchanged glances, unsettled, but backing off. The wind slid across the field once more, colder now, carrying the faint scent of frost. Caleb stroked the mare's neck gently, feeling the uneven rise and fall of her breath. "I've got you," he whispered. "I won't let go." And for the first time since the long afternoon began, Willow closed her eyes, not in pain this time, but in a fragile, fleeting moment of trust. A trust she had given him freely. A trust he could no longer walk away from. The wind sharpened as twilight settled over the open fields, brushing cold fingers across Caleb's jacket. Willow leaned gently against his leg, her breath fluttering as if it were hanging by threads. Caleb steadied her with a slow hand along her neck, feeling the tremors beneath her skin. She had chosen him. He could no longer deny that, and the weight of that choice pressed on his chest like a quiet vow he hadn't meant to make. Headlights carved across the gravel road, cutting through the gathering dusk. A second SUV rolled to a stop behind the first one. The doors opened with a clatter too loud for the stillness of the field. 2 more travelers stepped out, bundled in thick jackets, curiosity already turning to caution as they noticed the horse lying half-collapsed beside the fence. "What's going on here?" one of them called out. The couple from earlier answered before Caleb could speak. "Injured horse, badly injured. We tried telling him to stay back, but he won't listen." "He," Caleb murmured, "is standing right here." The newcomers approached only a few steps before stopping, their expressions stiff with unease. One man held his phone like a shield, ready to record trouble. The woman beside him tugged her scarf higher, as if protection could be found in a layer of wool. Willow flinched at their voices. It was subtle, just a brief tightening of muscles along her shoulder, but Caleb felt it instantly. He lowered his hand closer to her cheek, letting her lean into him again. She did, without hesitation, as if his presence steadied her in ways the others never could. "She's scared," he said quietly. "Keep your distance." The woman frowned. "We're just trying to help." Caleb met her gaze, calm but firm. "Then don't crowd her." A few feet away, the first woman, still gripping her phone, paced anxiously. "Animal control said they'd be here soon. They'll know what to do." Caleb knew what that meant. Injured livestock was often treated like broken equipment, evaluated, assessed, then dealt with according to protocol. He'd seen enough of that growing up in Wyoming. If the animal was in pain, if recovery looked too complicated, too expensive, too uncertain, the decision leaned toward ending the suffering quickly. He looked down at Willow. Her eyes were half-lidded, clouded with exhaustion, but still searching for him each time his hand moved. She wasn't running from pain. She had already survived more than any young horse should. She wasn't giving up. She had dragged herself across a field to find someone who wouldn't walk away, and she had found him. The crunch of tires on gravel signaled another arrival. A white pickup bearing the county seal rolled slowly toward them. The group parted as the truck parked. A uniformed officer stepped out, a man in his late 40s with a thick beard and tired eyes, the kind of man who had seen too many emergencies, too many harsh outcomes. He scanned the scene, then approached with measured steps. "Evening," he said. "Who made the call?" The first woman raised her hand immediately. "I did. She pointed toward Willow. "She's in terrible shape, and this man won't move away from her." The officer nodded once, then crouched to get a better look at the mare. Willow stiffened. Her ears flattened slightly, but she didn't attempt to stand. Caleb felt her body tense beside him, her breath catching. "Easy, girl," the officer murmured. "No one's here to hurt you." But his tone carried an undercurrent Caleb recognized all too well, the voice of someone already calculating options. He straightened, hands on his hips. "Looks like she's been down for a long time. Injuries like this can go either way. You folks did the right thing by calling." Caleb's jaw tightened. What does that mean exactly? The officer didn't seem surprised by the question. "Means we evaluate. If transport is safe, we get her to a vet. If not." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Willow trembled. Caleb felt the subtle motion ripple through her body. She must have seen this before, heard the tone, sensed the shift. Animals often knew the truth before humans spoke it. "She can be transported," Caleb said firmly. "She got herself this far. She just needs help." The officer studied him. "You her owner?" "No." "Well then—" "But she came to me," Caleb cut in quietly. "She didn't pick anyone else here. She picked me." The officer looked toward the couple, then at the newcomers, as if gauging their reactions. They shrugged, uncomfortable, ready to hand off the situation to anyone willing. The officer sighed. "Listen, I appreciate your heart, but decisions like this aren't about who an animal chooses. They're about what's possible: pain, cost, recovery, reality." Willow lifted her head at the sound of his voice, weak but determined, and brushed it against Caleb's leg again, pleading in the only language she had left. The officer hesitated. Then he softened just a fraction. "All right. Let me take a closer look before we decide anything." Caleb stepped aside calmly, but not far. Willow shifted again, her gaze following him, her breathing hitching, as if afraid he might leave. The officer knelt once more, brushing dirt away from her flank. He examined her legs, the way her muscles spasmed in small, involuntary tremors. He pressed gently along her rib cage and frowned at the sharp intake of breath she gave. "She's in rough shape," he said quietly. "But—" He paused, glancing up at Caleb. "She's still fighting." Caleb nodded once. "She is." A gust of cold wind swept across the road, sending loose gravel dancing. The officer rose to his feet, rubbing the back of his neck. "All right. I can call for a transport rig, but the nearest large animal vet is in Jackson. It's a long drive. She may not handle it." "I'll handle the drive," Caleb said. The officer narrowed his eyes. "You willing to take responsibility for her?" Caleb looked down at Willow. The mare's eyes met his, trusting, vulnerable, choosing him again without hesitation. "Yes," he said quietly. "I am." The officer nodded slowly. "Then let's get her loaded." Behind him the travelers exchanged relieved glances, already pulling back, already stepping away. They had come. They had watched. And now they were leaving, as people often did when trouble found its rightful owner. But Willow wasn't watching them. She wasn't watching the officer. She was watching Caleb, the one person who hadn't turned away. The old stock trailer rattled faintly as Caleb backed his truck toward it, the dim glow of the tail lights flickering across the frost-touched grass. The animal control officer helped him lower the ramp, both men working with quiet efficiency, though the wind cut sharper with every passing minute. Night had settled fully now, the sky a deep indigo, and the temperature had dropped far faster than anyone expected. Winter's first breath had arrived early. Willow lay near the fence, her legs folded awkwardly beneath her. She tried to lift her head when Caleb approached, her ears fluttering weakly at the sound of his footsteps. Her eyes followed him with a soft, uncertain focus, as though afraid he might vanish if she blinked too long. "You're all right," Caleb murmured, lowering himself beside her. He rested a hand gently on her neck. She leaned into the touch almost instinctively, as if drawing warmth from his presence. "We're going to get you somewhere warm, somewhere safe." The officer stood a few paces back, arms folded, watching without interfering. Maybe he sensed something in Caleb's voice. Maybe he had seen enough animals to understand the difference between fear and trust. Whatever the reason, he didn't push Caleb to hurry. "Do you think she can stand long enough to be moved?" he finally asked. Caleb shook his head. "Not on her own. But if we lift her carefully, maybe." They gathered old blankets from the truck bed, spreading them beneath her as gently as possible. Willow's breath hitched in shallow bursts, her body tensing each time they shifted her weight. Caleb kept one hand near her cheek, whispering softly. Nonsense words, really, just sounds meant to soothe. Something about his tone seemed to help. Willow stopped fighting and let them guide her onto the blanket. "Ready?" the officer asked. Caleb nodded. Together they lifted the corners, creating a makeshift sling. Willow was lighter than Caleb expected, too light for a mare her size. Her legs dangled weakly, brushing the ground as they carried her toward the trailer. The metal ramp groaned under their steps, and Willow's hooves scraped softly against it before she was gently lowered onto a bed of hay inside. She lay curled on her side, chest rising and falling in uneven rhythm, ears flicking faintly at every new sound. Caleb crouched again. "I know," he whispered, "just a little longer." When he stepped out of the trailer, the officer gave a slow nod. "Drive careful. The mountain pass to Jackson gets slick this time of night. I'll take it slow. You call ahead to the vet?" "Yeah. Dr. Lena's expecting us." The officer hesitated a moment before offering his hand. "Good luck, Hartman." Caleb accepted the handshake. Something unspoken passed between them. Respect, maybe, or understanding. Then the officer returned to his truck, leaving the field to its cold quiet once more. Caleb closed the trailer doors, secured the latch, and made his way to the cab of his truck. He paused before climbing in, glancing back at the field, the place where everything had shifted in less than an hour. The travelers were gone, their tire marks fading into the night. The old fence stood still and silent, and Willow, broken, exhausted but alive, was now entrusted to him. He took a breath, climbed inside, and turned the key. The engine rumbled to life, headlights cutting through the darkness. He checked the side mirror. Willow lay still, her ears faintly visible over the hay. The sight tightened his chest in a way he hadn't felt in years. The truck rolled forward, tires crunching over the gravel. The road ahead stretched through open plains before climbing into the foothills. Within minutes, the cold deepened, turning every exhale into pale mist. Snowflakes, just a few at first, began drifting in the air like lost thoughts searching for a place to fall. Caleb pressed the heater higher. In the trailer, the mare shifted weakly. A soft thump echoed through the hitch, and Caleb glanced over his shoulder even though he couldn't see her directly. "Easy, girl. I'm right here." The faint noise settled. Miles passed beneath the tires. The landscape, visible in slivers between fence posts and trees, grew darker and harsher. Gnarled branches twisted against the sky. Patches of ice gleamed along the shoulder. Night driving in Wyoming was never gentle, especially with a living, fragile weight depending on him. He slowed as the road began its gradual climb toward the pass. The first real gust of winter wind slammed against the truck's side, nudging it half a foot toward the yellow line. Caleb steadied the wheel, jaw tightening. Another gust followed, then another. Snow thickened, swirling across the headlights in erratic streaks. The world outside the cab narrowed to a tunnel of white and black, an uneasy mix of motion and stillness. Caleb leaned forward, squinting into the brightness. In the mirror, the trailer rattled softly. He imagined Willow's breathing speeding up again, her small world tilting with every drift of the truck. "Hang in there," he whispered. "We're making progress." The wind roared louder, buffeting the doors. Up ahead, a pair of headlights swung wildly around a bend, too fast, drifting across the center line for a split second before correcting. A semi-truck, hauling double trailers. Caleb eased his foot off the accelerator and gripped the wheel tighter. As the semi approached, its lights filled the windshield like two suns breaking through a blizzard. "Don't drift," Caleb muttered. "Not now." The semi thundered past, the force of it slamming into Caleb's truck like a fist of air. The trailer lurched, the back end swaying just enough to make Caleb's heart stutter. He kept the wheel straight, fighting the urge to overcorrect. Snow blasted sideways, erasing the world in one thick rush. When the wind finally eased, he exhaled shakily. "Still with me, Willow?" The answer came as a faint thump from the trailer, weak, but deliberate. She was still there, still holding on. Caleb tightened his grip on the wheel. He wasn't a praying man anymore. Not since the night he'd lost something he could never name aloud. But he found himself whispering anyway. "Just a little more. Just stay with me." Miles later, when the lights of Jackson appeared faintly in the distance, warm, steady, golden against the dark, Caleb felt something inside him unclench. Not relief, not yet, but something quieter, something like possibility. He drove toward it, slow and steady, the tires humming along the frozen road. Behind him, Willow shifted again, as if sensing the change. As if she knew that whatever waited ahead, it would be different from the field where she had nearly faded into the cold. And for the first time all night, Caleb allowed himself to believe she might make it. By the time Caleb turned into the gravel lot of the Jackson Veterinary Center, the sky had gone from dark to almost ink black, heavy with low-hanging clouds. The soft glow from the clinic's exterior lights spilled across the snow-dusted ground, outlining the edges of the metal building in a muted halo. It wasn't a large facility, just 2 barns, a main entrance, and a narrow row of windows, but tonight it felt like a refuge carved out from the cold. Caleb eased the truck to a stop beside the loading area. The engine rumbled into silence, and for a moment he sat there, gripping the steering wheel, breathing in the heater's fading warmth. His fingers tingled from exhaustion, stiff from the tension of the long drive. Outside, the wind scraped across the siding like restless whispers. He checked the side mirror again. Willow lay motionless inside the trailer, her outline faint in the dim light. Her chest rose and fell slowly, each breath shallow, like she was hanging onto the world by the thinnest thread. Caleb stepped out and was met with a bite of cold that cut through his jacket. He hurried to the trailer, unlatching the door with hands that trembled more than he cared to admit. As the door swung open, warm yellow light from the clinic spilled over Willow's small, curled form. Her eyes fluttered open at the shift in brightness, though they seemed unfocused. When Caleb whispered her name, not knowing where he'd learned it, only that it felt right, her ears twitched faintly. "You made it," he murmured. "We're here now." The sound of hurried footsteps echoed from the side entrance. Dr. Lena Moore appeared in the corridor light, pulling on her coat with quick, practiced motions. Her red hair was tied back loosely, stray strands catching the glow as she approached. She carried the calmness of someone who'd lived too long in emergency rooms, someone who had seen hope break and mend countless times. "You're Caleb Hartman?" she asked, voice steady even before catching her breath. He nodded. She barely moved the whole drive. Dr. Lena stepped inside the trailer, without hesitation, kneeling near Willow's shoulder. Her gloved hands traced gently along the mare's side, pressing lightly, checking for responses. Willow stirred but didn't resist. "She's very weak," Lena murmured, "but she's still aware. That's good." Her brow furrowed when her hand reached the mare's abdomen. She felt along the length of a swollen area, her touch careful but firm. Willow gave a soft, involuntary flinch. "Looks like soft tissue trauma," Lena said, glancing up, "and she's been down for hours, maybe longer. That's dangerous for any horse." Caleb swallowed. "She dragged herself through the field to get to me." Lena paused at that, her expression shifting from clinical to something gentler. "She chose you?" "I don't know," he answered quietly. "But she came straight at me, through the cold, through everything." Lena nodded slowly. Sometimes animals know who's safe long before we do. The wind rattled against the trailer walls, making the moment feel even more fragile. "Help me lift her," she said softly. "We need to get her inside." They slid a rigid mat beneath Willow's body. Caleb lifted from the front while Lena supported the back, moving with the slow precision of people carrying something precious and breakable. Willow's body shook with each shift, but she didn't fight. She only pressed her muzzle toward Caleb's arm, her breath faint and warm against his sleeve. "Good girl," he whispered, "just a little further." Inside the clinic, the air was warm and smelled faintly of hay and antiseptic. The soft hum of heating units filled the hallway. Lena guided them toward the treatment bay, brightly lit, with metal countertops and neatly arranged tools. Everything here felt purposeful, built for moments exactly like this. They lowered Willow onto a padded table. Her legs settled awkwardly beneath her, her chest rising in weak pulses. Lena checked her vitals quickly, her movements efficient yet tender. "Her heart rate is high," she said. "She's in pain and dehydrated, but she's still fighting." Caleb placed a hand near Willow's cheek. She turned her head slightly, resting the tip of her muzzle against his palm. Even Lena paused to acknowledge it. "She trusts you," she said. "That will help her get through this." Caleb didn't trust his voice, so he didn't answer. He only kept his hand there, steady, letting the mare lean into it as if the quiet contact anchored her. Lena began preparing IV fluids, antibiotics, and a sedative. Caleb stepped back to give her space, but remained close enough for Willow to see him. He watched as Lena worked, measured, focused, softly narrating her steps to keep the room calm. A few minutes later, Lena injected the sedative, whispering to Willow as the mare slowly drifted into a heavy, necessary sleep. Her breathing steadied into slow, even patterns. "That's better," Lena murmured. "She can rest now." Caleb allowed himself a long exhale. Lena turned to him. "I'll run some tests. Check for internal bleeding. We'll know more soon." He nodded, but his gaze stayed on Willow, on the slight rise and fall of her chest, on the stillness that felt both comforting and terrifying. "Do you think she'll make it?" he asked. Lena didn't give false promises. She looked at him, her expression firm but kind. "I think she has a chance," she said. "She survived long enough to find help. That tells me something. But it won't be easy." Caleb ran a hand across his face, exhausted. "Do whatever you can." "I will." As Lena stepped away to prepare testing equipment, the room grew quiet, quiet enough for the hum of machines to sound like distant breathing. Caleb moved closer, resting his hand lightly near Willow's neck. "You're safe now," he whispered. "I won't let you go." Her breathing didn't change, but something in her posture softened, as if even in sleep she heard him. And for the first time since he'd found her in the fading light of the fields, Caleb felt a fragile spark of warmth spread through his chest. A warmth he carried into the long, uncertain night. The hallway outside the treatment bay felt colder than the night air Caleb had walked through. Maybe it was the sterile smell, or the hollow echo of his boots on the polished floor, or simply the fear he refused to name. Fear had a way of slipping into places where even grief couldn't reach. And as he stood outside the door, hands buried in his jacket pockets, Caleb felt that fear settle deep in the space behind his ribs. Through the small window he could see Willow lying under the fluorescent lights. Tubes ran along her neck, gentle monitors blinked with muted colors, and heated blankets were draped over her slight frame. She was asleep, but her stillness didn't look peaceful, not yet. It looked like surrender, a surrender to exhaustion, to pain, to the long road she had taken alone before finding him. He lingered there, unable or unwilling to move farther away. Dr. Lena stepped into the hall, peeling off her gloves. Her expression was thoughtful, the kind of seriousness that didn't alarm but didn't comfort either. She nodded gently when Caleb looked up. "She's stable for now," she said, "but that may change. We'll know more after the imaging." Caleb tried to steady his breath. "How long will that take?" "A while," Lena answered. "Her vitals need to stay consistent enough for sedation. She's right at the edge." The phrase landed heavily. At the edge. Caleb glanced back at Willow. "She fought so hard to get here." "I know," Lena said softly. "Some animals, they have a will that surprises even us." She motioned for him to walk with her. He followed, though every step away from Willow felt slightly wrong. They stopped near a counter cluttered with charts and imaging pads. "What we're dealing with," Lena began, "isn't just surface injury. Her body is in shock. Long-term pressure on her side has compromised circulation. And this," she tapped a note written in quick script, "this swelling along her abdomen concerns me." Caleb listened, jaw tight. He wasn't used to feeling so helpless. In his former life, before the flames, before the night that cut a piece out of him, his hands had always known what to do. But here, there was nothing to lift, nothing to carry, nothing to shield from falling debris. Only time, only waiting. "Can she survive the surgery?" he asked finally. Lena didn't rush to answer. She crossed her arms loosely, gaze lowering for a brief moment. "The honest truth? I don't know, but without intervention, she won't make it till morning." The sentence drew the air out of him. He had known. Somewhere deep down, he had known. But hearing it made the hallway narrower, the lights harsher. Lena's voice softened. "You brought her this far. Whatever happens now, it matters that she didn't face it alone." Caleb swallowed hard. "I didn't do anything special." "You answered," she said. "Most people don't." He didn't know how to reply, so he didn't. The silence stretched, carrying something unspoken between them. After a moment, Lena touched his shoulder, not as comfort, but as acknowledgement. "I'll go prep the team. Stay close." She walked away, her figure blending into the quiet hum of the clinic. Caleb returned to the window, leaning one shoulder against the wall as he watched Willow breathe. He remembered the way she had dragged herself toward him, each pull heavy, each step laced with trembling refusal to give up. He remembered the faint weight of her head against his boot, the way she leaned into his palm as if that small contact was enough to steady her whole world. "She picked you," the officer had said earlier. Caleb let out a long, uneven breath. He wasn't sure he deserved that choice. Minutes trickled by, then an assistant motioned for him. "We're ready for imaging." Caleb stepped back as the staff moved into the bay. He watched through the window, Willow being repositioned carefully, more tubes added, the table adjusted. The machines clicked softly, filling the room with the strange, rhythmic language of medicine. For a moment, Willow stirred under the sedation, her muzzle shifting toward where Caleb had been standing earlier, as though she felt him nearby even in sleep. Caleb placed his palm against the glass. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm not leaving." The imaging procedure lasted longer than he expected. When Lena finally emerged, she held a tablet filled with glowing scans. She motioned him toward a quieter corner. "This is her spine," she said, pointing at a cluster of bright shapes. "No fractures, which is good, but there's deep bruising and significant inflammation." Her finger traced another. "Scan Willow's abdomen. This is where the real danger is. Internal swelling, possible tearing, infection spread. Her system is fighting hard, but it's overloaded." Caleb tried to focus on her words, but all he could see was the faint outline of the mare curled on the table moments ago, small against the expanse of white light. "What do you recommend?" he asked. "Surgery," Lena said. "Immediate. It's risky, very risky. Her heart may not tolerate the sedation, and even if she makes it through, recovery will be long." She met his gaze directly. "But if we don't act now, she won't survive the night." The line was drawn, thin, sharp, and cold as the wind outside. Caleb didn't hesitate. "Do it." Lena nodded once. "I'll assemble the team." As she left to prepare, Caleb walked back to the window. Willow was being prepped again. Tubes replaced, monitors adjusted, warm blankets traded for sterile drapes. The room pulsed with quiet urgency. He pressed his palm to the glass again. Maybe he didn't know why this mattered so much. Maybe he didn't know why the thought of losing her made something in his chest ache in familiar, old ways. But he did know this. She had fought to reach him. She had trusted him, and he would not let her slip away without giving her every chance. Inside the bay, Willow's breathing hitched once, then steadied. A line thin as breath, hers, his, held the night in place. The doors to the operating room opened, and everything that came next would depend on that fragile, trembling line. The operating room doors closed with a soft, deliberate click, swallowing Willow into the bright, sterile world beyond them. For a long while, the hallway remained utterly still. Caleb stood frozen where he was, staring at the seam of the doors as though sheer willpower might let him see through them. He knew better, knew that whatever battle she was fighting in there was hers alone for now. But his feet didn't want to move. His chest didn't want to loosen. He sank into a chair along the wall, elbows on his knees, fingers woven tightly together. The overhead lights hummed in a steady rhythm, an indifferent reminder that the world kept moving no matter who waited behind closed doors. In a strange way, the quiet made the tension worse. It let his thoughts churn freely, pulling old memories to the surface like debris after a storm. He remembered another night, another hallway, a different set of doors. A small hand slipping from his grip. He pressed his palms together hard, grounding himself in the present, reminding himself that tonight wasn't then. Tonight a life still had a chance, if the world stayed steady just a little longer. Minutes blurred into something shapeless. Caleb rose, paced the hall, sat again, rose again. Every time he passed the window of the dim recovery room, his eyes flicked toward the empty mat prepared for Willow. A blanket lay folded at the foot of it, waiting for a body that might never return. He wasn't a man who prayed anymore. But somewhere beneath the worn-out edges of his breath, something like a plea flickered. The operating room light switched from white to amber, an indication that the first phase of the procedure was complete. Caleb felt his stomach twist with an ache he didn't want to name. He moved closer, standing rigidly in front of the doors, listening for anything he could make sense of. Muffled voices drifted through, calm but firm. The metallic tap of instruments, a brief rise in urgency, then quiet again. A vet tech hurried down the hallway carrying bags of fluids and sterilized tools. She gave Caleb a fleeting, sympathetic glance before disappearing into the OR. He nodded back, though he wasn't sure she saw it. The hours stretched. Outside, the storm had died, leaving behind a hush like fresh snowfall. The windows along the hallway collected a thin film of frost, softening the edges of the world beyond. Each breath Caleb drew felt like it left him lighter, emptier, as if the weight was slowly hollowing him out. He pressed a hand against the cold glass, watching his reflection blur. "Come on, girl," he whispered. "Don't let go now." A sudden alarm beeped sharply inside the OR. His spine straightened, his breath caught. But after a few seconds the tone steadied, and the muffled instructions from Lena's voice resumed their deliberate cadence. He closed his eyes. At some point, the fatigue of the day, it had been only hours, though it felt like years, settled over him. He leaned back against the wall, sliding halfway into a seated position again. His head dropped forward, chin to chest. He didn't mean to fall asleep, but he drifted, not into rest, but into a numb suspension, hovering somewhere between tension and exhaustion. A door opened. Caleb jerked awake, heartbeat stumbling. He blinked rapidly as Lena stepped out of the OR, peeling off her cap. Her hair stuck to her cheeks, and her breath left her in a fog of relief and raw fatigue. He stood so quickly, the chair scraped against the floor. "Is she—" Lena held up a hand, not to stop him, but to steady herself before she spoke. Then she met his gaze squarely. "She made it," she said softly. "She's not out of danger yet." But she came through the surgery. The world felt like it shifted a few inches to the right. Caleb exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding, a long, shuddering rush of disbelief. Something hot stung behind his eyes, and he blinked it away. Lena offered a tired, grateful smile. "She fought harder than I expected. That mare has more spirit than her size suggests." Caleb nodded once, unable to speak. "We've moved her to recovery," Lena continued. "You can see her, but only for a moment. She needs quiet." He followed her down the hall. The recovery room was dim, lit only by a single lamp near the corner. Willow lay on her side atop the padded mat, wrapped in warm blankets. Her breathing was shallow but steady, each inhale lifting her chest a fraction. Tubes and wires traced gentle arcs around her body, blinking with soft lights that registered tiny signs of life. For a second, Caleb didn't trust his own steps. He felt as if one wrong movement might shatter the fragile calm around her. But Willow's ear twitched faintly at the sound of his boots. He knelt beside her. "Hey," he whispered, "you're still here." Her eyelids shifted, fluttering weakly, but she didn't open her eyes. Instead, she nudged her muzzle half an inch toward his hand, like a reflex born from a fading dream. He eased his fingers beneath her cheek. The warmth of her skin, not fevered now, but exhausted, pulsed softly against his palm. "You did good," he said. "Better than I would have." The monitor beside her beeped in a steady cadence, like a tiny heartbeat speaking on her behalf. Lena stood a few feet behind him, arms crossed loosely, watching the connection with a quiet understanding. "She'll need intensive care," she said. "Days of it, maybe weeks, but tonight she's earned her rest." Caleb brushed a thumb lightly along Willow's cheek. "Whatever she needs." Lena nodded. "Then you should rest too. There's a cot in the waiting room. I'll wake you if anything changes." But Caleb didn't move. Not yet. He stayed until Willow's breathing settled into a calmer rhythm, until the faint trembling along her flank eased, until he knew she felt safe enough to drift fully into sleep. Only then did he stand and step back from the mat. As he did, Willow's ear turned toward him one more time, so small a movement he almost missed it. He paused. "I'm right outside," he whispered. "You're not alone anymore." Her breathing steadied in reply, soft as the first quiet light before dawn. Caleb stepped into the hallway, the weight in his chest lifting a fraction. The night was not won. The journey was far from over. But for the first time since he found her in the dying glow of the fields, hope felt like something he could hold. The first true morning after the surgery arrived quietly, as if afraid that any sudden movement might disturb the fragile thread Willow was clinging to. Pale light crept through the frost-covered windows of the recovery barn, stretching itself thin across the concrete floor. Everything felt muted, the colors, the air, even the footsteps of the staff who whispered more than they spoke. Caleb had slept only in fragments. The cot in the waiting room wasn't uncomfortable, but rest was hard to find when every sound from down the hall made him sit up straight, heart pounding. He had risen before dawn and hovered outside the recovery room until Lena arrived, coffee in hand, surprised to see him awake. "You should sleep," she'd said gently. He'd only shaken his head. "I'll rest when she's better." Now, standing at the doorway, he watched Willow. "Breathe." The rise and fall of her chest was steadier than the night before, though still shallow. Her body lay curled on the padded mat, framed by blankets and quiet machines. But there was something different in the room this morning, an almost imperceptible shift in the air. Not hope, exactly, but the shadow of it. Lena stepped in beside him, scanning the monitors. "She made it through the night," she murmured, as though speaking too loudly might change the facts. "That's the first hurdle." Caleb's shoulders eased a fraction. "She's really fighting." "She is," Lena agreed. "Some animals surprise even the science." He walked closer, careful not to disturb anything. Willow's eyelids twitched as if trying to open. Caleb knelt and rested a hand near her muzzle, the way he had the night before. After a moment, she shifted her head, inching it toward his fingers. Lena noticed. "She knows you're here." Caleb exhaled softly, feeling an ache warm beneath his ribs. "I'm not going anywhere." Willow stirred again, a small movement but smoother than yesterday. Her ears flicked when Caleb spoke, her body responding with faint tremors, not from fear but recognition. The hours that followed passed in slow rhythms. Lena and her team checked Willow's vitals, adjusted her fluids, and coaxed her to lift her head for brief moments. Caleb stayed just behind them, observing with a quiet reverence that surprised even him. He had never been the type to hover, but this wasn't hovering, it was witnessing. By midday, the snow outside had melted into patches of thin ice that glittered under the new sun. One of the techs opened the barn's side door to let in air. A cold breeze curled through the space, carrying the faint scent of pine and thawing soil. Willow sniffed the breeze. It was the first spontaneous thing she'd done since the surgery. Lena's eyes softened. "That's a good sign." "Really?" She's noticing things again. The world is coming back into focus for her. Caleb moved his hand slowly, brushing a knuckle along Willow's cheek. Her eyes fluttered open, just a sliver. Brown, glossy, tired, but alive. "Hey there," he whispered. "Welcome back." Her gaze drifted toward him, unfocused but trying. When her breathing hitched, he leaned closer, letting her feel the steadiness of his voice. "It's okay. You're safe." Lena adjusted a dial on the IV. "She'll be groggy today. Tomorrow, maybe, she'll try to sit up." Caleb nodded. "I'll be here." He meant it. As the day unfolded, Willow kept improving in small, almost invisible increments. A longer blink, a deeper breath, a faint twitch in her front legs as though she were dreaming of walking again. Caleb stayed beside her for all of it, sometimes talking in low tones, sometimes sitting silently with his hand near her muzzle. Every now and then, when the wind shifted through the open door, Willow's ears perked toward it, almost as if she were listening for something far away, something she remembered from the life she had before the injuries, before the cold, before her long journey across the fields. Caleb watched those little reflexes with quiet curiosity. There was a yearning in them, soft and thin but unmistakable. She was looking for someone, he said quietly to Lena when she passed by. "What makes you say that?" "The way she reacts, the way she turned toward the wind." Lena leaned her shoulder against the doorframe. "Maybe she was," she said thoughtfully. "But sometimes, when they can't find the people they used to trust, they choose new ones." Caleb didn't answer right away. His gaze settled on Willow again, on the soft rise of her breath. "I didn't choose her." "No," Lena said. "She chose you." Her words lingered long after she returned to her work. Afternoon turned to early evening, and the barn lights warmed to a softer glow. Caleb stepped outside briefly, letting the cold air bite at his cheeks while he cleared his head. The horizon burned with streaks of orange and pale pink, fading into a blue that seemed too deep for such a quiet day. When he returned, Willow had lifted her head slightly off the mat. Not far, just enough to see the blanket beneath her. Her legs trembled, but she held the position for a few seconds. The tech standing nearby looked up. She just did that on her own. Caleb moved to her side, his breath catching with something like awe. "Willow," he whispered, "that's incredible." The mare's ear flicked toward him, and for a split second her gaze sharpened as if she truly saw him, not just sensed him, but recognized him, as if the wind had changed direction again, quietly, almost imperceptibly. Lena returned in time to witness Willow's small victory. "She'll need days of therapy," she said gently. "But this is more than I expected today." Caleb's hand rested near Willow's neck, steady and warm. "She's stronger than she looks." Lena smiled. "So are you." Caleb didn't acknowledge that. Instead, he stayed beside the mare. As done, she rested her head again, her breathing deeper now, her body relaxing into the blankets like she finally understood the danger had passed, for now. Outside the barn, the wind picked up, rustling the edges of the siding. But inside, there was a different kind of quiet, gentler, like a fragile beginning. Caleb stayed until Willow slipped into a peaceful sleep, her muzzle resting near his hand. Tomorrow she would try to sit up. Tomorrow she might attempt her first supported step. But tonight, the simple fact that she had opened her eyes, really opened them, was enough. Enough to make the whole world feel like it had shifted, almost the way it had the moment she first looked at him in the fading light of the fields. Spring arrived slowly in Wyoming, as if unsure whether it was welcome. The last snow melted into thin ribbons along the fence lines, leaving behind patches of soft earth that smelled of thawing roots and returning warmth. The air carried a different kind of quiet now, not the heavy hush of winter, but something gentler, like the land was exhaling after months of holding its breath. Willow had been moved to the rehabilitation paddock 2 days earlier, her strength returning bit by bit, as carefully as a candle rekindled after a long night. Caleb walked beside her each morning, steadying the harness that supported her hind legs, guiding her as she learned how to trust the ground again. The first steps were uncertain. The next ones were steadier. She was still fragile, but she was no longer fading. This morning felt different. Maybe it was the mildness of the breeze or the soft warmth of the sun settling over the paddock. Maybe it was the way Willow's ears perked as Caleb approached, alert yet calm, as if she sensed something was about to shift. Or maybe it was the look in her eyes, clearer, deeper, holding something steady enough to quiet even Caleb's lingering worries. He slid the gate open and stepped inside, boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. Willow waited near the center of the paddock, resting her weight comfortably on the harness. Her coat, once dull and dust-covered, caught the light now in warm streaks of brown and bronze. A faint trail of scar tissue traced her flank, but the pain it once held no longer dimmed her gaze. "You ready?" Caleb asked softly. Willow flicked her tail once. A quiet yes. He positioned himself beside her and helped her settle into the support frame. She shifted her front legs first, strong, sure, and pressed them lightly into the ground. The wheels behind her steadied. Then she pushed. Not far, not fast, but with intention. Each step rolled the wheels gently over the grass, the sound rhythmic and soft. Caleb walked beside her, one hand on the harness, the other near her shoulder. He didn't guide her. Not anymore. He simply stayed close, letting her decide the pace. Lena watched from the paddock gate, her arms crossed, expression unreadable and warm all at once. "She's stronger every day," she said quietly. Caleb nodded. "She earned it." Willow paused halfway across the paddock, turning her head slightly toward the breeze. The wind brushed through her mane, carrying the scent of pine and warming earth. She stretched her neck forward, inhaling deeply, as if gathering courage from the world itself. Then she planted her front legs again. Caleb felt it before he understood it, the shift of her weight, the slight trembling beginning in her shoulders. He froze, instinctively ready to catch her if she faltered. Willow didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed fixed on the small patch of sunlight stretching across the paddock, as though something in that brightness called to her in a language older than pain. Slowly, with a will that felt stitched from every mile she had dragged herself, through every breath she had fought to keep, every moment she had chosen to survive, Willow began to lift herself. Her hind legs quivered underneath the harness, muscles pulling in a movement they hadn't remembered in weeks. The frame supported her, but the effort was her own. Her front legs pressed harder into the earth. A tremor rippled up her spine, but she did not stop. Caleb stepped closer, barely breathing. "Easy, girl. Take your time." But she wasn't moving for caution. She was moving for freedom, for the memory of standing beneath open sky. With one final push, gentle, yet fierce, Willow straightened. Her hind legs locked in place for a single, impossibly fragile moment. The wheels of the harness lifted just an inch from the ground. A breath. A heartbeat. A miracle. Lena covered her mouth, eyes wide. She's doing it." Caleb didn't speak, couldn't. He felt the moment in his chest, not sharp, not overwhelming, but deep, spreading slow warmth into the spaces where old hurt had lived too long. Willow trembled under her own strength, but she was standing, truly standing. Willow held the position for a few seconds more, then let herself sink gently back into the harness. As her legs settled, her head turned toward Caleb. Her eyes met his with a softness he had only glimpsed in her darkest moments. He stepped forward and knelt in front of her. Willow leaned in, resting her muzzle against his chest. "You're incredible," he whispered, voice shaking. "You're still here." For a long moment neither of them moved. The world around them hushed, the rustle of grass, the distant call of birds, even the breeze seemed to still, as if the land itself was honoring her small triumph. Lena approached quietly. Most horses in her condition would never stand again, not like that. Caleb stroked Willow's cheek. She didn't give up. "No," Lena said, "and neither did you." The words lingered in the air, gentle and true. As the sun climbed higher, Willow nudged Caleb again, a soft, grateful gesture that carried everything she could never say. He placed both hands on her face, steadying her, grounding himself in the warmth she had reclaimed. "You didn't just survive," he whispered. "You saved me, too." The breeze picked up again, swirling through the paddock, lifting strands of Willow's mane like a banner of the life she had fought for. It carried away the last echoes of winter, leaving behind only the promise of new mornings. And there, beneath the wide Wyoming sky, a man and a mare stood together. Two lives that had nearly been lost, now stitched gently into one quiet, extraordinary beginning. If Willow's journey touched you even a little, just leave a simple comment below. You don't have to write much. Even a single word lets us know you were here. And if you'd like to walk with us through more stories of kindness, courage, and second chances, make sure to subscribe. There are many moments still waiting to be shared with you.